At Microsoft's press conference for Gamescom, we got to see a trailer for Dark Souls 3 that involved a bunch of gameplay, but the two individuals here on the couch got to actually play Dark Souls 3. And now I'm going to pick their brains for what all is the deal with that game. Mike Mahardy and Mary Kish, Dark Souls 3, you guys got hands-on.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a castle.
We did, for
Weird.
1 whole hour in a castle.
Yeah.
All right, so did you see yesterday during the trailer anything that looked familiar? Was that like from the time, sort of period in the game that you got to play?
Definitely. From the trailer, you can already see it's the same area that it normally is in, right? Like the same time frame. It looks like an Armageddon state or a bunch of buildings that are now dilapidated.
It's very Dark Souls is what you're trying to say, right? It's very like, there's medieval weaponry and armor, there's sort of these castles in looming cities with bridges, and it all has a very specific look. Sort of dialing back the sort of gothic horror look of Bloodborne into a more Dark Souls zone.
Yeah, it's definitely got that Dark Souls flair, but what you might not have noticed from the trailer and what we saw in our playthrough was that it's more interconnected worlds. Dark Souls 1 did that really well, where you would go into this crazy path, and when it came back, it looped around right to the beginning. There'd be a gate there that was locked. That's how you come out, and you end up right where you started. And that was something really lovely that I really enjoyed about Dark Souls 1 level design, and it wasn't the same in Dark Souls 2. You went off into these weaving paths, and then you just turned around and went back. But this new Dark Souls 3 seems like they're taking a lot of hints from the original Dark Souls and giving it this nice interconnected world.
Was there any sort of the sort of combat mechanics and gear stuff that you guys noticed that was interesting?
Yeah, so one of the major additions in Dark Souls 3, which is kind of Dark Souls' answer to Bloodborne's the trick weapons, you could press L1, I think, and it would kind of extend a weapon, or plow it into the piece of concrete to become a hammer.
That was the best weapon.
Yeah, the Kirk hammer was great. But in Dark Souls 3, they have weapon arts now, so you just hold a trigger and you'll kind of do a charge-up attack, and then you could do a strong version or like a more of a, light-handed kind of attack.
It depends on which weapon you have, too. Yeah. Will depend on how that weapon actually interacts with the world. So you have a long sword, it'll be like this giant overhand maneuver, whereas if you have a small sword and maybe a shield, it'll be like a really aggressive thrust forward. There's also these dual weapons.
Yeah.
There's scimitars, and if you use that L2 stance, you do a spin attack, which aerials everyone around you, which is really amazing if you're surrounded by enemies. So depending on your scenario, you're best off with a different weapon choice.
And now these weapon arts, is that like just a move you have in your arsenal at all times?
Kind of. So each time you get to a bonfire, it resets, and you get 20 between bonfires to use. So you kind of have to parse them out.
Okay, so it's a consumable sort of power, kind of like an Estus flask.
Yeah, they're limited. I'm not sure if you're going to get upgrades that increase the quantity between bonfires, but I definitely found myself trying to save them as much for the boss as possible. And then also another kind of minor, which it seemed minor at first, and I didn't know this until it kind of screwed me over. You can only do the riposte with like really light kite shields now. Okay. Any like medium or larger shields, you can't do that. And I didn't know that until I died, because I tried doing it and failed.
You're trying to do it a bunch, but really you're just meant to sort of stand in and take it on your heavy shield.
We got to play as 2 classes. One was a knight, the other was like a brute kind of with an axe who had more powerful attacks. But it definitely felt a little more like Bloodborne as far as the dodge goes. It felt a little more forgiving. And I spoke to a producer for the game, and they said, they're still very much keeping Dark Souls its own franchise. They're not going to make it Bloodborne. They're not going to make Bloodborne like Dark Souls down the road, but they are kind of
Blood Souls.
Yeah, borrowing from each other.
The stamina was regenning really, really fast, so I think that they're taking some stuff from Bloodborne and letting you kind of fight a bit faster, a bit quicker. They want faster-paced movement, but they are still giving the original vibe, depending on your playstyle. If you get that long sword and you have a really heavy attack, you're not going to be moving a lot. They're taking elements that you might have seen before and they're revamping them and they're making something new. So it's not the same as just stealing from a game. They're taking elements that they feel were successful and made the game better. And I think they're just kind of fine-tuning that. And from what we played so far, it's a really nice mix of faster movement, but you still need to time your movements properly to survive and to continue in that world.